The gospel lesson comes to us today from Matthew chapter 13, verses 24 through 30 and 36 through 43. Would you please stand in honor of the reading and the hearing of the gospel? He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well, and the slaves of the householder came and said to him, "Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?" He answered, "An enemy has done this." The slaves said to him, "Then do you want us to go and gather them?" But he replied, "No, for in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn." Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples approached him, saying, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field." He answered, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen." The grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of the Lord endures forever. Please be seated.
I've picked out a video for you today that's going to go quick like a bunny. It's going to be fast. You're going to have to pay close attention. We even put the words up so you can understand the words. They go so fast. And Alex is going to show that to you right now. Listen fast. Did you know, have you noticed that if a plane ever goes down, it will be reported this way: so many souls were lost on this plane today. Have you noticed that? They count souls when they had, so many souls were on this plane today. Now, some of those souls were weeds, but that stewardess, in all of her humor and hiding behind it, was trying to save everybody on that flight, every soul on that flight. We could take lessons from her. I want you to know that when preachers move, there comes a time that they turn a corner and they know that home has changed. I had to go to Chamblee this week because Joy Parsley was in St. Joe's Hospital, and I needed to see her, and I wanted to go, and so the 285 was jammed up, and I jumped off earlier because I knew the back way to St. Joe's. We call it Peel Hill. St. Joe's, Northside, Scottish Rite, and even Emory's got some clinics over there. Peel Hill. And so I was in Chamblee. I saw her and began to make my way back to Lawrenceville, was talking to a preacher. The preachers that I like to talk when they're riding, because they're too busy to talk when they're at their desk or when they ought to be working someplace else. And so the preachers that call me and want to talk when they ought to be working are the ones I don't like to talk to. So I was talking to a preacher friend of mine on my way back from St. Joe's, and he said, "Where you headed? Busy?" "Yes." "Where you headed?" And I said, "I'm headed home." And then I realized I was leaving Chamblee and heading to Lawrenceville. And I had turned a corner and I was headed home. You see? There are people in our world and people in our church who contribute very little. They cause confusion, division, sometimes destruction. There are people in our church who complain, and just like Ford, always have a Ford, man. Just like Ford, they always have a better idea. There are people in our world and in our church who do not share, but they're careful that they want to get their part. There are people who always complain, and there are some people who do not attend our church or any other church, but they tell us all the things that we're doing wrong and how bad the church is, and that it's filled with hypocrites, and that's why they won't come. Well, they go to the grocery store and it's filled with hypocrites. They go to the movies and it's filled with hypocrites. There are some people who never help with anything, and then there are some people who come but seem not to hear, and their lives never change. And I promise you, and Bill can tell you this is true, that the story of why they're like they are, that they tell me the very first day I'm in the building, will be the same story that they tell as I'm leaving, because nothing's going to change. There are some people who just hate folks and are hateful toward folks. And there are some people that we call undesirables. We don't bother to ask them to come, and we pray to Jesus that they won't discover us over here. There's some that we wish would go away. And some of those are so bad that we really wish they'd go to the Baptist church down the street. Weeds in our garden. We have a wonderful church here. I've told you over and over again how much I love it and what an honor it is to be appointed to such a church as this. We have a great church filled with wonderful people. We do. But weeds. What about the weeds? When Matthew and my Mark, who are now fathers and grown, and Matt has 5 children, Mark has 6, and they keep getting married and bringing more home, and I wonder when in the world this is going to end. When they were little bitty boys, I thought of them like I think of you. They're mine. Nobody can love them like I do. Nobody can take care of them like I do. I want to do it all. I want to see about my boys. I want to see what they're eating for breakfast. I want to make sure they brush their teeth. And I do that with you. This is my flock. God's, of course, that goes without saying. I want to do all the hospital visits. I want to do all the funerals. I want to do all the weddings. I want to do all the sermons. I want to keep up with the finances. I want to lead the church because you are mine and because I love you. I know that's impossible, and I thank God every day for the staff that we have. I had to go to the hospital. I had pneumonia. It was in the fall of the year, and I knew it was traumatic for me because those were my boys. They were my children, and I wanted to take care of them. If you're a mother, you know exactly what I mean. I wound up in intensive care with pneumonia. Fall was a hard time of year for me, especially when I was younger. The allergies, the pollens then were harder on me than in the spring. Now, doesn't much matter. I don't know if I got meaner or just I don't know what happened, but now it doesn't seem to bother me as much. But when I was a young mother, I had a hard time with that. And my mother had come because I was finally out of the hospital and was coming home. She'd come to watch the boys, I can tell you. My mother was not very warm and fuzzy. And I don't ever remember smelling cookies that she was baking, but she was good, and she raised me to be tough, and she had her business in order, and she was the best mother I could have ever had, and I want to say that up front. But my boys were so glad I was home, and they ran outside and came running in with this big bouquet of flowers. It was huge. I don't know how long they worked at picking or where they got them. It was a bouquet of goldenrod. My mama scolded those 2 little boys, fussed at them. They didn't know. And I stopped her and took those weeds and put them in a vase and put them in a place of honor, not on the bedside table, I can tell you, but in a place of honor. And I want to confess to you that was the most beautiful bouquet of flowers I think I've ever gotten. Bunch of goldenrods. Now, I've had flowers from Buckhead florist. Gorgeous. But they can't hold a candle to that vase full of goldenrods that my 2 boys brought me that day. I'm convinced and I'm persuaded that that's sort of how Jesus looks at us. Those weeds to him are beautiful when they're surrendered, when they're given. You see? Does it make sense? Jesus was teaching his disciples and teaching the crowds that day and had gathered them around him. He told them about a farmer that had sowed some good seeds, but the evil one, he said, had come and sowed bad weeds, and the slaves wanted to dig up those weeds, and Jesus said, "Leave the weeds alone." Now, we like this text. We know this text. We like it. We like it because we can look around. If Sherry asks you to look to the left and look to the right, we can look to our left and look to the right, and we can find the weeds. We ought to dig them up and get rid of them. We can't hardly wait till the day that they are thrown into a fire someplace and there's gnashing of the teeth. Except we have met the enemy, and it is us. Except we don't have the ability to tell the weeds from the good seeds. We don't have the ability to recognize the flowers from the weeds. We think we do. Here we are, a bunch of roses or Shasta daisies. And beside us are weeds. And Jesus said, leave the weeds alone. You don't know what is flowers and what is weeds. I'm a sucker for a bad boy. I always have been a sucker for a bad boy. The good news is I know it, and I don't let bad boys take advantage of me. But every bad boy I have ever known, every one, has a heart that has good in it that people have overlooked for generations and generations. And sometimes the better their heart is. People just see them as weeds. And Jesus said, let the weeds alone. When I was in seminary, there was a student there who said he wanted to be a Methodist preacher, but he didn't like the Methodist church. He wouldn't practice the Methodist theology, had something to say about everything that the Methodist church did or didn't do. I wanted him to go away. I mean, go be something else. Lord, there's a lot of ways to buy groceries. You don't even have to be a preacher. He fussed about his church. He has a student appointment. His people were fussing and fighting and bickering all the time. Didn't have a staff, and he blamed everything on our system, that mean old Methodist church. He was thinking of quitting, and finally he decided that he would leave. And he found somebody that agreed with him, and so he went right down the road from that little country Methodist church, and he built his own church, bought a little land, and the church was pristine and white and had a very high steeple. But he wouldn't let anybody in unless they interviewed with him, and unless they filled out an application, and unless they submitted their W-2 so he could know that they were tithing. Well, I rode by there one day, and I thought, I bet he's in there with his doors closed studying. And he was. Studied all the time. One day I rode by there, and there was a for sale sign in front of his church. And he got a job selling pictorial directories. Jesus said, let the weeds alone. Leave them alone. Anybody here remember Joseph McCarthy, or historically, anybody here read about him? He wanted to get rid of all the weeds, you remember? My goodness, if you became suspect from one of his investigations, oh my Lord, you couldn't get a loan at a bank, you couldn't rise in any of the cooperations, you'd be blackballed. Even actors and actresses were being blackballed because he was trying to get rid of the weeds. And how about the KKK? Remember them? They were going to get rid of all the weeds. They were determined to get rid of all the weeds. I stopped the KKK from meeting on the town square in one of the cities where I was appointed to the church there. It was pretty easy to do. They met on the town square, but they didn't have anywhere to park, so they parked in the parking lot at the United Methodist Church. And I just put yellow tape around it and stood out there with a yard broom and said, "You're not going to park here." It's really not hard to outsmart those old boys now, I'm telling you. How about Hitler? He really wanted to get rid of the weeds. Problem is, we don't know what is the weeds. We don't know who are the weeds. The problem is, we have met the enemy, and it is us. Jesus said he'd take care of that in the end, that he knew people's hearts, and he could tell the wheat from the weeds, and he'd take care of that at the end. And we really didn't need to go about trying to pull up the weeds when most of us were weeds ourselves. We really need to be careful about that. I remember a vase of goldenrod that my mother thought was just weeds, but to me was beautiful. We say that people can't change, that leopards never change their spots, or that people here sit around and talk about people that will never change. Well, I'm here to confess to you that I did, and still sometimes I recognize the weed in me. But Jesus turned water into wine. And I believe that he can turn weeds into beauty. People sit around and talk and say, you can't teach an old dog a new trick. But he taught this old dog a new trick. Fred Craddock tells a story. If you don't know who Fred Craddock is, don't read him, because I'll steal his stories the whole time I'm here. Fred Craddock is the man who taught homiletics at Candler School of Theology, and he's the one that gave us license to be storytellers. If it wasn't for Craddock, about every 25 or 30 years, preaching has a nervous breakdown and it changes. And up till Craddock, it was a 3-point or a 5-point sermon, and people would start closing up their Bibles when you got to the 3rd point. They thought they would go get to lunch ahead of the Baptists. And Craddock gave us permission to tell stories. I'll always be grateful to him for that. And he tells the story of going to visit his niece, and on his niece's floor lay a retired greyhound. She went to make sandwiches in the kitchen, and Craddock said to the dog, "So you're retired, huh?" "Yep." "Well, why did you retire?" No answer. And Craddock said, "Did they treat you badly?" No. Treated me very well." "Did they house you badly?" No. Had air-conditioned kennels, could go outside when I wanted to, come in when I wanted to, had my own private kennel. "Well, they didn't take care of you." "Oh, they took the best care of me. I had the best food, all of it I wanted. They hired a vet, one of the top of the line." "So you were a loser?" "No, I won most of the races that I ran, I won." "Well, why did you retire?" And the old dog looked at him and he said, "Well, I still run. I go out and run with the children, and I still have pretty decent food, and I can come in and out of the house when I want to, and I got a family that loves me." He said, "I retired because I realized what I was chasing wasn't real. I'm so very glad Jesus said, leave the weeds alone. I can teach old dogs new tricks. I can turn water into wine. I can change people's hearts. I'm so very thankful. Jesus said, leave the weeds alone. And he sent me here to you today, Lawrence First. He sent me here today to this wonderful church, to Lawrenceville First United Methodist Church, to tell you, leave the weeds alone. Amen.